In the Russian archives there are documents of the second half of the 17th century, when Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich sent a decree to the Chugev voivode Sukhatin in 1656 year to build a fortress. Previously, there was a settlement on the site of present-day Kharkiv before the Tatar period. Already by 1658 year, one of the then military engineers, a Silifant warrior, built a fortress. But who was interested in these Moscow documents? It was henceforth assumed that the name Kharkiv itself comes from a certain Ataman Karaton, nicknamed Kharkiv, to whom, back in 2004 year, an equestrian monument was erected by Ulaf Zurab Tsereteli. Our postrel has ripened everywhere. It should certainly be mentioned that at one time, another, more romantic candidate was considered. A certain glorious Cossack Andrei Kvitko, who kidnapped the minor daughter of the Moscow governor, who was sitting there in Kiev, and, rightly fearing the revenge of an angry father, fled to remote places, where he founded Kharkiv. However, after thoughtful consideration, this kid did not pass into the founders. First of all, the origin is not all clean. Muscovites were also involved in the pedigree. And secondly, it was decided that it was somehow inappropriate for a Ukrainian Cossack to fall in love with Muscovite daughters. There are Shurs and Ukrainians for this. By the way, there was a round-the-clock police post at the monument to Hetman S. Gaidakny in Sevastopol for 6 years. They were afraid of the reaction of Sevastopol residents to the kind of founder imposed on them. The Crimean Tatars tried to make their contribution to the fun with history. At the request of the Mejlis in general, an unrecognized self-governing body of the Tatars, one of the streets of Simferopol was named after Devlet Giri. The same Khan, who burned Moscow in 1571 year, killed tens of thousands of residents, and took tens of thousands to the Crimea. It must have been inspired by this initiative, the Ukrainian nationalist Dodi, having decided, probably not to be petty, proposed in the bill to vote for total disposal of everything that reminds of the Russian Empire and the Soviet past. According to his plan, it was necessary to rename no less than 750 settlements, mainly with Turkic names. The Crimean Tatars revived again. Now, they proposed to rename Sevastopol to Aktyar, after the name of Sevastopol Be. But then came the 2014 year. As a matter of fact, everything exploded even earlier when the next Maidan began in Kiev on November 21st. However, it differed from all the previous ones for the worse. Well, let's take it in order. President Yanukovych, who replaced the outspoken Bandera Yushchenko, was certainly not a pro-Moscow politician. Those in Ukraine have somehow not been noticed for all the years of independence. But in politics, he was much more realistic than his predecessor, with his American wife and dad, a concentration camp guard. The former banderization of Ukraine has significantly weakened, and the state has stopped allocating huge amounts of money for it, as was usual under Yushchenko. And most importantly, Yanukovych signed the Kharkiv agreements with Russia in April 2000 of the 10th year, according to which the Black Sea Fleet remained in the Crimea until 2042 year. That's exactly what, there's nothing to guess, did not suit the overseas guys who got their hands on all sorts of color revolutions. Unlike the previous Maidan, the bet was made almost from the very beginning, on confrontation and blood. Well, at first everything looked relatively peaceful. Assistant Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, walking among the protesters, did not throw inflammatory slogans into the crowd, but peacefully fed the cabbage soup cookies. Eyewitnesses claim, far from the highest grade. Well, against the background of what started very soon, it really looked relatively peaceful. But very soon, peaceful demonstrators armed with broken chains, stones, injuries, and Molotov cocktails tried to break through to the presidential administration building. By that time, they had already captured the Kiev City-State Administration and the Kiev City Council, and the next day, the House of Trade Unions, burned to the ground a month and a half later. Both the police and the Berkut Special Forces Squad did not have firearms at all, just shields and batons. However, very quickly, they were loudly accused of killing peaceful demonstrators. However, the law enforcement forces, and what was at their disposal, acted extremely sluggishly. Now, analyzing the events, it is clear that they simply were not given decisive orders for full acceleration, which was not difficult for professionals to do. And the news spread widely. 2 demonstrators were brutally killed by government snipers. However, the Ministry of Internal Affairs will soon declare that the dead, found very quickly on the street, were not killed by sniper bullets, but shot with shotgun charges at close range. Interestingly, one of them turned out to be Belarusian, the other, an Armenian. A month later, in February of the 2014 year, snipers really appeared. Moreover, they fired at both demonstrators and Berkut fighters. Even the commission of the putschists who overthrew Yanukovych came to the conclusion that they did not shoot from the law enforcement officers' weapons, but there was nothing that could stop it. These snipers, who always remained so modestly unknown, appeared with enviable regularity every time where, according to the leadership developed by the American Sharp a long time ago, all kinds of color revolutions took place. For the first time, they showed up in the Romanian city of Timisoara, where the indignant people just spoke out against the Ceausescu regime. The whole world was bypassed by TV news footage, where it was claimed that a bloody Ceausescu was shooting at peaceful demonstrators, and the number of victims was 122 people, then it decreased to 56. Then it turned out that the victims were snipers, people who died of natural causes, and they were borrowed from morgue attendants for money. But Ceausescu and his wife have already been shot after a mock trial. During a demonstration in Tehran, a young girl was killed by a sniper bullet in the heart. The Iranian special services have stated that they have neither such cartridges nor such rifles in their arms. But the portrait of the young beauty was carried around the streets for a long time with appropriate vociferous endowments to the bloody Gabni, this time Iranian. In October 1993, an officer of the Alpha Group was killed by an unknown sniper shot, which was not followed by the Supreme Council at all. There is little doubt that this was a provocation with the aim of embittering the Alphas and sending them to storm the White House, which Alpha did not do. In January 1991 year, during the storming of the TV tower in Vilnius by law enforcement forces, unknown persons fired at both the Alfovtsi and the demonstrators from Mosin rifles, which had long since been removed from the Soviet army. Unknown snipers shot at demonstrators and law enforcement officers in Syria and Libya, in Egypt and Thailand. In Kyrgyzstan and Tunisia, the handwriting is always the same. On February 22, 2014 year, the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine actually overthrew Yanukovych, under the pretext that he left the territory of Ukraine, which means that he ceased to be president. The wording of this did not appear in the Constitution of Ukraine. It said only, "The title of President of Ukraine is protected by law, and remains for him for life, unless the President of Ukraine was removed from office as a result of impeachment." There was no impeachment, no pale parody of it. The next day, the Rada, again in complete contradiction with the Constitution, entrusted the duties of the President of Ukraine to its chairman Alexander Turchanev. By this time, armed militants were already rampaging in Kiev. For several days now, more than 1,000 pistols and submachine guns, a large amount of ammunition, have been seized. In the police departments of Lviv, the column of the Golden Eagle leaving Kiev was attacked every now and then. Many deputies were forcibly detained in the Rada building and forced to hand over voting cards. Armed men in masks burst into the homes of politicians of different parties and, in official language, explained the current political situation. The first robberies began. Chronicle of the Crimea by Shirokharad and Starikov. On February 23, 2014 year, tens of thousands of residents of Sevastopol went to a rally and refused to recognize the self-styled Ukrainian government, realizing that the Kiev chaos could reach the peninsula and could end in considerable blood. The protesters declared no confidence in the local administration and elected a new head of the city, citizen of the Russian Federation, Alexei Chalev. In parallel, a rally of Crimean Tatars took place, just in support of the Kiev putschists. On the 24th of February, the self-styled Kiev Vlada was recognized by the European Union and the United States in a fire order. The fact that it was completely illegal for Vlad did not bother representatives of the civilized world at all. As one of the American presidents used to say about the South American dictator, he is a scumbag, but this is our scumbag. February 25th. Another rally was held in front of the Supreme Council of Crimea in Simferopol with a single purpose: to inform the parliament that those gathered do not recognize the power of the Kiev putschists. February 26th. The Crimean self-defense continues to build the first roadblocks around Sevastopol. By that time, there was information that Shurik militants had been spotted at the Belbek airfield. There is another rally in Simferopol, but the restless Mejlis of the Crimean Tatars brought its supporters to the same square, shouting the cry of the Sweetamites, "Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes." There were several fights between the protesters. About 20 people were injured, 2 were killed. One in a crush, the other from a heart attack. On February 27th, polite people come to the building of the Supreme Council and take deputies under guard. Caution is not superfluous. There are still a lot of Ukrainian troops in Crimea, and they are trained mainly for punitive functions. The Crimean self-defense forces are being organized. Deputy of the Supreme Council of Crimea, leader of the Russian Unity Party, Sergei Aksenov, has been elected as the new prime minister. The 1st of March, Russian President Vladimir Putin submits an appeal to the Federation Council on the use of Russian armed forces in Ukraine until the normalization of the socio-political situation in this country. The council supported the president's proposals unanimously. Almost on the same day, Russian fighters appear over the peninsula. A marine infantry unit is being transferred to the Crimea on landing ships, which does not contradict the Kharkov Treaty at all. According to it, the number of Russian troops in Crimea cannot exceed 25,000 people, but it is not exceeded. Is 22,000. Sevastopol, Cossack and Dowslev bays, where Ukrainian warships are located, are blocked by the Black Sea Fleet. There is no resistance. Most of the blocked pennants are not warships, but tankers, tugs, transports, a garbage collector vessel, and even a certain collector vessel Shostro, which is mysterious to me, a land person. I have no idea what that means, but it's unlikely a combat unit. Marines, Cossacks, local and registered Cubans who arrived in Crimea, as well as the above-mentioned polite people, who have long been openly called the GRU Special Forces in print, block and quickly disarm all Ukrainian air defense facilities in Crimea. 3 anti-aircraft missile regiments and a tactical aviation brigade, where out of 29 MiG-29 fighters are able to fly only 4. In the same way, polite people block all military camps of Ukrainian servicemen who have not shown the slightest resistance. Unless smoke and stun grenades were used twice, when the captured groups occupied one of the small anti-submarine ships and the Slavutich control ship. However, the shots still sounded. Twice. It was all the same unknown snipers who showed up this time in the Crimea. A Ukrainian soldier and a Russian Cossack were killed, but this provocation did not cause any incidents. The 16th of March, a referendum was held in Crimea, in which 83.1% of the Crimean voters took part, excluding Sevastopol. Of these, 96 as many as 77% voted for the reunification of Crimea with Russia. 89.5% voted in Sevastopol, 95.6% of them voted for reunification. The 17th of March, on the basis of the Declaration of Independence, the Sovereign Republic of Crimea was proclaimed, including the city of Sevastopol, with a special status. Alexei Chely and representatives of the parliament are authorized to sign an interstate agreement on the admission of the Republic of Crimea and the city with a special status of Sevastopol to the Russian Federation. On the same day, the President of the Russian Federation signed a decree recognizing the Republic of Crimea as an independent and sovereign state by the Russian Federation. March 18th. An agreement has been signed between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Crimea on the admission of the Republic of Crimea to Russia. That's it. There is complete calm in Crimea. He was spared from those burning blood that overtook the southeast. Somehow, the Crimean Tatars became quiet and went into the shadows, and after all, we have been threatened for more than 1 year by extremists who will one day come out of hiding and arrange such a thing. They didn't come out, and they probably won't come out anymore. Well, since in any important historical event, if you search thoughtfully, there will certainly be a comic note. I will give a real story of the Crimeans. A group of military doctors of the Ukrainian naval forces was just about to leave the Crimea, packed their bags, and wanted to fly to Kiev, which of course, no one prevented them from doing. However, already at the airport, they accidentally found out from someone what salary the military doctors of the Russian Navy receive. After that, somehow forgetting about the call of the independent motherland, everyone as one picked up their suitcases and amicably returned to the city. The story is absolutely not fictional. It began in general, quite modestly, as it sometimes happens. Only Ukrainian dashing new historians invented the mythical people of ancient Yukrov, who in immemorial times created a mighty power, a light of civilization, freely spread out in the middle of thickets and gullies, along which wild Europeans ran in animal skins. The language of these Yukrovs formed the basis of the main European languages. And the great leader of the Huns, Attila, is actually a glorious ataman of the Yukrov, Gatila. Appetite, as you know, comes with eating. Epical discoveries multiplied. No, the ancient Yukras were not born in Europe. They are the descendants of the Atlantans who escaped after the death of the legendary continent. Having settled in Egypt, the ancient Ukrainians created a state there and built the Great Pyramids. The evidence is ironclad. The ancient Egyptian bas-reliefs depict point-to-point classical Ukrainians. The head is shaved bald, only in the middle sticks out a foreleg. It is that chuprina which was worn by the Zaporozhye Cossacks. And in general, the word Jerusalem is taken from the language of ancient Yukrov and means Cossack camp. The most interesting thing is that some of the Indians sported exactly the same hairstyles not so long ago. However, Ukrainian myth-making historians have never shown the slightest desire to become related to American Redskins. It is easy to understand them. There is no need for such relatives who did not create any civilization, who lived almost in a primitive communal system. It is much more prestigious to come from Atlantis and be the founders of the ancient Egyptian kingdom. But the berries were ahead. Ukrainian is one of the oldest languages in the world. There is every reason to believe that already at the beginning of our chronology, it was an intertribal language. We have reason to believe that Ovid wrote poems in the ancient Ukrainian language. The ancient Ukrainian language, Sanskrit, became the mother of all Indo-European languages. The Ukrainian language is the antediluvian language of Noah, the oldest language in the world, from which the Caucasian Yaftic, Prohamid, and Prosimid groups of languages originated. Quite often, the authors of these revelations were not some kind of half-educated journalists, and not urban lunatics, on the contrary, professional historians, settled and titled. One of the above pearls was printed by a professor with an interesting surname Dubina, and in the 2006 year, the following came out of the mouth of a certain Pan Kononenko when it came to ancient India. One of the clans mentioned in the epic Mahabharata was Ukrainian and came from Pripyat. It sounded not in a pub after the 10th mug, and not in the ward of a specific medical institution, but at a scientific conference in Kiev. And Pan Kononenko is an academician, director of the Institute of Ukrainian Studies. Such things. But that's not all. Later, even the origin from the Atlantans seemed a little plebeian, and there were revelations according to which the ancient Yukras, already descendants of aliens who came to Earth from time immemorial, either from Sirius or from Venus. Sanskrit is based on some mysterious language, Samsar, brought to our planet from Venus. Isn't it about the Ukrainian language? The history of 1,000 years ago was simple. Ancient Russia was represented by a native Ukrainian power, which no Muscovites, no Russians had anything to do with. They spoke Ukrainian there, wrote in Ukrainian, and all the princes were entirely Ukrainians. It so happened that I myself had to face the supporters of this theory. In one of the books, analyzing the classic version of the death of the prophetic Oleg from a snake bite, I expressed doubt that a snake could bite through a boot made of rough leather, to which I received a severe rebuke from some Ukrainians who wrote, "These are your Muscovite princes. The barbarians of the north wore boots made of rough mammoth leather, and our Ukrainian Prince Vleg's boots, as befits a civilized person, were suede the thinnest, artfully tanned leather, that a snake will bite through like paper." The more recent history was treated with the same familiarity. The defense of Sevastopol during the Crimean War turned out to be a page of military glory of the Ukrainian troops, under the leadership of Admiral Nakimenko. And the brave sailor Peter the Cat is actually Petro the Gut. Mutiny on the battleship Potemkin in 1905 year, under a red flag. But you, Muscovites, will lie. In fact, the team of the battleship, consisting entirely of teal Ukrainians, under the crimson Cossack flag, opposed the cursed Muscovites for the creation of an independent Ukrainian state. Once I made an ironic remark on the internet: if this goes on, Ukrainian new historians will begin to prove that Adam and Eve spoke the purest Ukrainian language. And I was a little stunned when they answered me quite seriously. Something similar is already being stated by Ukrainian pundits, without a shadow of a smile. The trouble is, I repeat, that these revelations were presented by scientists in the most serious way. True, sometimes they came downright into painful perplexity. One young lady, doctor of historical sciences, speaking to the public and talking about Galicia, said with unwavering lips, "Galicia was part of Austria-Hungary until 1939th year." Doctor. Historical Sciences. For those who have forgotten a little history, let me remind you, the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed in 1918. From that time until the autumn of 1939th year, Galicia was part of Poland. We were laughing. We had fun. All this seemed to be something frivolous, a prolonged hoax, a buffoonery that Ukrainians themselves would soon get tired of. Meanwhile, these historical revelations were widely propagandized, received official support, and even gradually leaked into school textbooks. Of course, we knew about something else that no longer caused laughter. They knew that the fighters for the freedom of Ukraine at the state level were declared degenerates from the SS Division of Galicia, who did not gain a drop of military glory at the front, but were notorious for terror against partisans and civilians. That in the same Galicia, in western Ukraine, demonstrations are taking place, led by the grandfathers of the SS, who were not shot at the time, despite the fact that the entire SS was recognized as a criminal organization by the decision of the Nuremberg Tribunal, that the then president of Ukraine Yushchenko, the scion of a guard from a German concentration camp, established the Order of Mazepa, and posthumously awarded the title of Hero of Ukraine to Roman Shukhevych, the SS executioner Bandera, that the myth of the Holodomor, the famine of 1932-1933 years, is being unwound with might and main. Although this famine, and it really was, affected many Russian regions, Ukrainian experts defended their version with foam at the mouth. The Holodomor was limited exclusively to Ukraine, and it was arranged by the accursed Muscovites in order to exterminate the freedom-loving Ukrainians they hated. There were, however, annoying punctures. For example, with a photo exhibition dedicated to the Holodomor, it turned out that some of the pictures depict not Ukrainians dying of hunger, but starving Volga region 1922nd year, and even the exhausted American unemployed during the Great Depression of 1929 year. This and similar incidents did not affect the zeal of those who clamored about the Holodomor. There was no laughing matter here. However, even then, we believed that this was some kind of short-term clouding of minds, like our perestroika, and in the end, the Ukrainians would come to their senses, as many fighters of perestroika came to their senses. They're sane people. There was a hope that Galicia would come to her senses. I quite amicably communicated with young Galicians on the internet and live in Kiev. Normal cuts of Divchina, who did not harbor either malice or hatred. Hope for recovery was also added by the fact that it was obscene instead. Yanukovych became the president of Ukraine. In many ways, the complete opposite of its predecessor. And in the book published in the 2011 year, I wrote what I sincerely believed in. The current Ukrainian government, as far as can be judged now, unlike the past, is sane and responsible. Let it be slow, but the process of normalization of relations between Russia and Ukraine is clearly unfolding, which will only benefit both countries. We believed it seriously. However, something in my soul was anxious, and so I continued, one trouble. Although with the lead opposition, they definitely move into the category of political marginals. It really seemed that way to me at the time. Grounds for concern remain. Because those who made up fairy tales about the construction of Egyptian pyramids by ancient Ukrainians, proclaimed SS men heroes of Ukraine, falsified history, have not gone anywhere. They simply lost state support. But they remained the same, with the same slogans, perverse theories, and cannibalistic propaganda. So it's too early to calm down. I am neither a prophet nor a seer, and therefore, I have underestimated a lot, and underestimated a lot. The misfits of the Shurs and their wingmen did not become, and they found state support, although already from another state. And anew, almost openly controlled by the Americans, another Maidan began, this time a bloody one. And the flywheel of the most natural civil war has been unwound, where the victims are already counting by tens of thousands. And a significant part of them falls on the civilian population. And one day, it was like an electric shock passed me. But these very young battalion members who are now committing atrocities in the Donbas, decorating their banners and themselves with Nazi symbols, were just brought up on those nonsense that we laughed at. We laughed, and they were brought up. What else can I add, looking from today? Everything is still going well in Crimea. It is not so safe in the southeast, where shots and explosions are rattling. Unfortunately, very many of us who openly had fun reading about the Ukrainians, the descendants of the Atlantans, and other pseudo-historical nonsense, did not foresee that more than 20 years of processing of this waste paper by young people would lead to a lot of what a single photo is worth. Very young girls, laughing merrily, fill bottles with gasoline. And these bottles will fly in a few minutes to the building of the House of Trade Unions in Odessa, where dozens were burned alive. Who could have foreseen that a significant part of the Turbats who are brutalizing in the southeast will be ethnic Russian? Speaking only apparently, the whole point is that we still have too much Soviet. Until the last moment, we perceive the inhabitants of Ukraine, well, if not as brothers, of course, intelligent, sane people, who are able to appreciate all the stupidity and primitiveness of Bandera propaganda, but we saw young guys and girls, cute and charming. What's scariest of all, posing with Nazi symbols. But most importantly, Crimea has returned.